For our friends at home, they can watch as well. That's cool. So tonight, I thought we'd talk about the Tallis blessing. On this first page here, I've given you a copy of it, of how it appears in our Siddur, Mishkan Tefillah. Normally we just, in the Saturday mornings, we just say that bottom blessing, the bracha, but the top part is actually really beautiful as well. And so I thought I'd start at the beginning with the rationale of why we wear talit. And I talked about this a little bit when we were talking about the techelet and the blue strand, but it comes from Numbers 15:39. There'll be a fringe, basically, at the end of your garments. That will be your fringe, whatever that means. Look at it and recall the commandments of God and observe them, so that you do not follow your heart and eyes into your lustful urge. In other words, the talit was meant to keep us on the righteous path, and to be remind us of God's commandments. Historically, we actually don't know originally what clothes held the tzitzit. Nowadays, we have talit katan and other things that we're going to talk about. But at this point, we know that in the 2nd or 3rd century CE, the rabbis at least would attach them to a large garment that wrapped around the entire body. Wrapping oneself became a ritual not just for the rabbis, but judges before trials, teachers, and rabbis. So, and there is some beauty to that we still take in the idea of being wrapped up in Torah and wrapped around one another. Back in that day, it was split the same way it is today. Some wore a talit all day, others didn't. But one thing that was basically consistent is it wasn't worn at night, because you have to see the tzitzit. The whole idea is you have to see the blue of the techelet or the white of the string. So if you can't see it, you can't keep away your lustful urges and be reminding of the commandments. So obviously with that idea, Jews in Israel took this blessing out of the evening service, out of the Shema, since the point of wearing it is seeing the tzitzit. And this is the blessing here that the part here, Numbers 15:37-41 of the Shema. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe of each corner. That'll be your fringe, and the same thing that we said above. So one way to deal with the fact that it was wrapped around you or things like that is the invention of the talit katan, which is basically an undershirt that's like a vest, a V-neck vest, that attaches tzitzit that you wear underneath, and it's still worn today, certainly by ultra-Orthodox and others. It was also a way to encourage to wear the tzitzit in the times of assimilation. You wouldn't really tell unless you're really looking that you're wearing the tzitzit. You look like everybody else, and you don't have this big, large garment wrapped around you. Later, the ban against wearing a talit at night was relaxed. Post-17th century, actually, service leaders, shliach tzibur, or rabbis started to wear the symbolic talit while wearing services because of the honor of the congregation. So that's why, while we don't wear a talit in the evening, you'll see me wear a tallis, because that is stemming from that 17th century relaxation of that ban. Our classical reform Jews did away with the tallis altogether, as well as the kippah and other things. This was from the late 19th century, because they thought those original reformers thought that it didn't have any meaning. These ritual objects didn't have any meaning. Those words in those first reform conferences are pretty strong against that sort of thing. But when that started to change from classical reform to contemporary reform, we started to, what we say, reclaim tradition. And if there are things that are meaningful to us, and so we began to reincorporate Tallis and kippot and kashrut and all those sort of things. While we were doing that in the late 20th century, the Orthodox Jews started to wear their talit katan with the fringes displayed externally. In other words, they weren't going to hide it anymore. So the mid 20th century or late 20th century was a big change for Reform Jews and Orthodox Jews in terms of the tallis. All of a sudden, Reform Jews started to wear them again, and the Orthodox Jews started to wear them out. There is some biblical aspect of the tallis besides, obviously, the numbers in terms of the fringe itself. If we look to that first part, Barchi nafshi et Adonai, bless Adonai, O my soul, that comes from Psalm 104. And it's a very mythological psalm. It has an alternate creation, just like Psalm 74. It pictures God wrapped in a robe of light, spreading out the heavens. So it differs from Genesis 1. And so the blessing that we have put up here is a way of what we call imitato Dei. We're imitating God by wrapping ourselves in the tallis, just like God wrapped God's self in the robe of light. So it's a mythological sort of parallel to that. Again, from a halachic point of view, Barchi nafshi et Adonai, O my soul, bless Adonai. The first obligation of the day is not to ourselves, but to God. We therefore begin with this prayer. So this donning the tallis is one of the first things that we are supposed to do in the morning if we are heading to services or not, depending on our observance. This is before saying the morning prayer, specifically the tallis blessing, which is why I put this in here. Certain things that we are to avoid doing traditionally before doing that. So we don't begin our day with personal work-related acts. We don't set out on a journey. We don't eat. All the things that we're supposed to do before. Hey, Michael. The things we're supposed to do. First is we're supposed to say those prayers, put on the tallis, be reminded of those things, and then we can go work, then we can go on our journey, then we can eat. And let's see what else. So following laws apply to wearing tzitzit, the talit, whether it's talit katan or a tallis in general. It's the four-cornered garment. Obviously, the rabbis stipulate that a four-cornered garment can be worn so that tzitzit can be attached. That makes sense. So that's why it's a tallis or the talit katan. I have seen in my day other situations. A colleague of mine in Israel put what are those climbing clippy thing carabiners on his belt loops and put the tzitzit there. So innovation, but according to mitzvah and halakha, it's supposed to be attached to a garment. But it should be inspected. Make sure that before you put on a tallis that it's inspected prior to wearing it. Make sure that everything is the same way. This is one of those mitzvot that you recite the blessing before putting it on instead of after. It's why a lot of the ones that are made have the blessing embroidered on the collar there. So you hold it up, you say the blessing, and then you put it on. You adjust the tallis so that two of the fringes are in the front and two in the back. You'll see that when I put mine on. Those big long ones are in the back. So you don't just wear it as a shawl. In other words, you don't wear a tallis where all four the big fringes are forward. One should be in the front, one should be in the back. There is a difference between a full tallis in this way and a prayer shawl, which sometimes you'll see, or a dress shawl that you'll see some rabbis or some service leaders wear, which is a bit of an exception now, where it looks like all four are sort of attached and down. So that's going a little bit more towards assimilation. Traditionally, it shouldn't be worn as a shawl. You may see that throughout the service, either tonight or when you're on Saturday morning, that my tallis sometimes falls off. So the rabbis know that it sometimes falls off. So if it falls off completely, meaning that the whole tallis, you have to repeat the blessing. But if you see it sort of slip off the shoulders or something like that, it doesn't have to be repeated. And if you take it off purposely with the intent to put it back on, in other words, if you take it off for just a second, put it back on, no new blessing is needed. It's like anything else. The rabbis thought of everything. And of course, you can recite the blessing over a borrowed tallit. Of course, we have tallits for people to. We have tallits for people to borrow. So I wanted to. These 2 points I think are the most important: a woman's voice and modern liturgy. Until a few decades ago, this blessing over the tallis was spoken only by men, because men were traditionally the only ones allowed to wear tallit. We have not seen a huge rise in women wearing tallit, certainly beginning with Reform Judaism, which we're proud about, and a bit conservative as well. And those who do usually say just the prayer for putting on the tallit, that's in the traditional sense. The writer of this said, and this was interesting when he said, this was, it says, it is a pity that women are not familiar with the paragraph before, meaning Barchi Nafshi, for it draws its imagery, which has been traditionally been the sphere of a woman's experience. It says, God is described as robed in light, as though wearing a garment, a simlah. The modern Hebrew word for simlah is a dress. God spreads out the heavens like a curtain. As we wrap the tallit around our physical bodies, we pray that our souls will be dressed in beautiful spiritual tallit in the world to come. God is depicted as a divine seamstress, weaving garments for those who dwell in heaven on earth, in this world and in paradise. So this was written by a woman author. I'm not so keen on gender sort of like curtains and seamstresses and dresses. But I was thrilled to hear that it was not written by a man, at least. But this particular woman author, I think what she was trying to say is that there is some beautiful imagery, feminine imagery, in Psalm 104 and in this pre-blessing here that should encourage women to feel comfortable wearing a tallis. But she didn't say it as well as I would have liked. What I would say about tallit is just like anything else. These ritual objects are not patriarchal. They're not assigned by gender. Certainly not in Reform Judaism. Women should don kippot and tallit or anything that connects them ritually to Judaism, just as a man should. And that should sort of be the end of the conversation. Unfortunately, it's not. But that's my opinion, at least. As for modern liturgy, from my friend David Allenson, he says typically tzitzit and tallit have been the biblical and rabbinic precedent. Previous generations of Reform Jews rejected them, as we talked about in the early or late 1900s, late 19th century. So they omitted this first meditation, or the Barchi Nafshi, or the blessing itself. Abraham Guyver included the blessing for tallit in what we would call a moderate reform prayer book in 1854. But then he removed it prior to that because they were of mystical origin. He decided to print the blessing as more radical 1870 liturgy. In the latter half of the 20th century, Reform became more congenially disposed, as we talk about, to ritual and mystical elements in Jewish tradition. That when we saw the Mishkan Tefillah's predecessor, Gates of Prayer, that started to be included, Tov Lehodot in the Dutch and Havodah Shabbat in Israel. Overall, the idea that we want to get across here is that the prayer book is always the place to look for taking the pulse of the Jewish community. So if the prayer exists in the prayer book, it means that people were saying it, or were supposed to be saying it, or they hoped they would be saying it. If it was not in there, then those leaders and thus those congregations did not do it. Here in Mishkan Tefillah, it has been put in, of course, with that very nice language for those who choose to wear tallit. It is not a mandatory ritual object, obviously, because of the spectrum of Reform Judaism and Reform choice. But for those who choose to wear tallit, here is the blessing that you can do, and that's the one that we do on Saturday morning. So let me stop there for a second and see if there's any questions for you guys about tallit or the tallit blessing in general. I will say that this first part at the top is abbreviated in our Mishnah Tefillah. It's much longer in conservative and Orthodox prayer books. So I
have a question. I know there's like a whole cottage industry of like women-oriented ritual products that's especially strong in Israel. And the last time I was there, you could go to whole dedicated stores that were just for like women's ritual objects, and obviously a big ritual object is the tallit.
Yeah.
And all of the ones that I saw and the ones that I purchased were the sort of quote unquote like shawl style, or like rectangle as opposed to like a tallit gadol, like a square one.
Yeah.
And I think also it would scare men if they saw me in them, and that is my aesthetic.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if those have been sort of taken up by like the Jewish feminist movement as well, or like where the tallit gadol kind of fits into this whole reform narrative.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Thinking back, my wife purchased a tallit from Women of the Wall, and it's this beautiful purple and red and colorful thing, but it is more shawl-like, with similar to the one that I have that's multicolor and rainbow color. But I think that it hangs in a way at the sides, so that one's in the front and one's in the back. There are those that, and I think that's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, because I have two that are like that, that are like the rectangle.
Right, and they come down, but I think as we are, it sort of does that, so it doesn't quite violate that. I'm not too familiar with, I wish I was, it sounds interesting, about tallit that have been engineered specifically for women, besides Women of the Wall, which is cool. I would say personally, from my experience, I have not seen a lot of women wear tallit gadol, the big ones where with the double like things. And some of that, I think, just maybe coincidence or style. I mean, when I got my Tallis in Jerusalem, they asked me what size I wanted, and I just said, the one that you have to keep doing this to. That's all I knew. Other people wanted smaller ones, and it's sort of your style. So I'm trying to think of my female rabbi friends. I've seen them don the big ones, I think, but I'm not too familiar with that particular arena of like how it was designed or anything like that. It's my hope that it's not designed specifically to not be authentic, right? That's my hope, is that because every once in a while we see that sort of underlying thing of like, well, it's for women, so it's not official.
Like all the ones, it's like, oh, they're pretty ones. Like instead of like, here is your choice of light blue stripe or dark blue stripe
or black or whatever it is.
Pretty, and they have like art on them, and they're art objects, and they're really beautiful.
Yeah.
Visual objects. It's seemed to me that we're like the tallit gadol. I've always wanted one, but I don't want just like here's blue stripe.
Yeah. When I was in Jerusalem, actually, it was very hard for me to find a tallit gadol that didn't have that like sparkly silver line in it. And I was just like, I'm actually looking for one that's like a little more boring than that. So there is like a little bit of, it is sort of like, glittered up. I've seen those for sure, and they're all very sparkly and everything like that. And I was just like, I'm not really looking for that. It was hard. It was really hard to find. But I think you're right. I think the beautiful artistic ones that we see, I think my bar mitzvah tallis was dark navy blue or dark green and like all kinds of beautiful stuff. It's just a particular style. I think it's harder to create that kind of art on such a larger tallis. That might be it, but it's a great question for business opportunity. Yeah. What else, friends? Yeah, David.
Well, after the Shema, it seemed like there was an extra paragraph that seems to be wrap around your.
Yes, it's still there,
Oh.
and it's in our Mishnah.
Oh.
Yeah. Paragraph of the Shema, part of the Via Hafta, which talks about bringing from the four corners of the earth, and you're supposed to wrap them around your fingers, right? So some people choose to do it, some people don't. Most Reform congregations don't. We just move to those paragraphs and then we move on. But certainly it can be done and is done. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the time where you see them, yeah, doing that. And I think when I was talking about, I don't know if I did it here, if I did a teaching session on Hagba, on lifting the Torah. I think I did, because I did talk about the fact that the pinky thing, where you wrap the tzitzit around your pinky and you hold it up when the Torah is read, has like a very goofy origin. Like it's nothing halachic at all. It's just I'll have to teach that again. I know, right? Yeah, it has this weird, like possibly Hellenistic, like pagan origin. Like people don't know, and they're just like whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's just. So that, yes. So when you have an aliyah and you are about to do the blessings or about to read, it is a tradition that you take your tallis as a makeshift sort of yad and touch it and kiss it to say, here's the spot where you start and here's the spot where you end it. Also very just cultural minhagi. I mean, it's just sort of like, good to know, start, stop. I can't touch it, but it's an acknowledgement sort of thing. But the tallis in that way as a ritual object can be used in that way, right? To make something holy or to connect you to that. And that's the cool thing about that. What else, friends? Yeah, Deb?
I mean, who can wear one?
Everyone.
Everyone?
Everyone can wear
No
one.
matter whether you have bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah?
So my traditionalist friends would say after bar mitzvah, because you were an official member of the congregation and you counted as a minyan. So in other words, it's not that you couldn't, it's just that it wouldn't be necessary for you because you wouldn't count as a member of the minyan. So you wouldn't be obligated to say these prayers that involve the tallis, right? So I personally love wrapping kids in tallises and having them feel that. There's nothing wrong with that. And so, for the same reason that there's a transition from childhood to Jewish adulthood, whatever that means, into being counted, that would be when you first put it on. And there's a wonderful tradition and that I do here, which is that's the first time that someone puts on their tallis, and is when they're leading services, is when they become bar mitzvah. If the tallis is connected to the family, the father, or the grandfather, or grandmother, the mother puts it on for the first time. It's a really emotional moment. They become a shliach or a service leader. So that's typically, customarily what we would do. But I would love to see, I would love to see Asher wearing a tallis. I think it would just drag on the floor as a problem, but yes, but everyone can, and I think those who choose to understand or try, rather not understand, those who wish to experiment and figure out, is this meaningful to me? Does it add something to my prayers? Does it add something to my connection to Judaism or not? In the same way, we're going to be doing Tefillin Tuesdays, right? Does wrapping Tefillin mean anything, or is it a ritual object that you just don't feel a connection to? Either way, I want you to be informed and I want you to try it. I love to see on Saturday mornings a full house of men and women wearing Tallis. I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think my first sermon here at Temple Israel was about how there is a observation that if you look above at a congregation putting on their tallis, it looks like tents, like the tents of Jacob. And it's this really beautiful moment of everyone sort of coming together and things like that. So I think I spoke about that. So yes, anybody where it doesn't drag on the floor, let's put that in our rule. How's that? Yeah. So okay, great, wonderful. Thanks, friends. I'm hoping to see more in case we get a minyan, but if not, you get a private showing. How about that? I don't know if coronavirus